My name is Greg Nilges, and this video is in support of Sonoran Desert Institute's FTH 212 striker-fired handgun Module 3 assignment. And today's date is 15 June 2024. There's no live ammunition in the workspace, and I do not have a functional firearm in front of me. So the first and part of one of this video, we're going to identify the major subassemblies, or the subassemblies of the Dagger, PSA Dagger handgun. First, we have the frame assembly. Then we have the slide assembly, recoil spring assembly, and although not technically assembly, we do have the barrel, which is an integral part of the functioning firearm, so we'll consider that, as well as the feed source or magazine assembly. Okay, for this next part, we're asked to describe the operation role of various major components / areas within the platform, and I've chosen to do that, meet this requirement by talking about the subassemblies as major components, even though they're a combination of components. And first, we'll talk about the magazine assembly. The magazine assembly obviously is the place that retains or stores the cartridges or ammunition and is directly involved in the feeding cycle of operation. The next would be the barrel. Again, we said this is not a true subassembly, but we're treating as such. It contains the cartridges / ammunition and directs and guides the projectiles. It's directly involved in the chambering, firing, and locking and unlocking phases of our cycle of operation. And next will be the slide assembly. The slide assembly contains the barrel, the striker assembly extractor, and is the link between the barrel and the frame assembly. It's directly involved in the feeding, chambering, locking, unlocking, and extracting. And next but not least but not last, frame assembly. Frame assembly contains the trigger assembly, locking block, feed source, and provides a grip for the shooter. It's directly involved in the locking, unlocking, firing, cocking, and ejecting cycles of operation. Okay, for this next part of the video, we have no live ammunition in the workspace. We have a disassembled firearm and an assembled firearm. The assembled firearm has no magazine feed source. We do a visual and physical check to make sure it's clear. And we're asked to identify areas that we would be most interested in viewing to properly determine functionality within the platform and explain what you would be looking for during the troubleshooting process. So what I'm going to talk about, there's a lot of them. We don't have the time for that. So first thing would be feeding. So with feeding, you would be looking at your magazine assembly, recoil spring, feed ramps, or not feed ramps, but the feed lips on your magazine. And for the firearm itself, you would be looking at the barrel on the feed ramp. Those would be your key suspect areas for feeding issues. Spring tension on your magazine spring. For chambering is another area. You'd be looking at the chamber itself within the barrel, make sure it was not corroded or excessively dirty. You also may suspect your recoil spring assembly if it is not strong enough. So it may be worn and weak and may not allow the round to chamber properly. So those are some things with chambering. For cocking, if you have issues with cocking, you may want to look at the striker assembly to make sure the engagement surface between the striker and the cruciform back here is not damaged in any way, shape, or form. Also, you may want to look at your striker spring to make sure it has proper tension. And the trigger bar assembly, this is from a remove firearm, and make sure it's moving freely as it should. Firing, if there are firing issues, you may want to look at this trigger safety. If the trigger safety is defective, it may prevent the trigger from engaging at all. You'd also look at your striker safety. So striker safety for this Glock 19 that's disassembled up here should be engaged with this protrusion on the trigger bar. And if for some reason the trigger bar was damaged, or the spring may be inside of the plunger safety is bound up or whatever, not allowing the plunger to depress, that could be an issue. Striker assembly, you will take a look at your striker and make sure your striker tip isn't chipped or broken in any way, or anything preventing it from protruding through the frame as it's supposed to. And also the connector on the to make sure if the connector were worn to the point where when the slide engages it, it's supposed to push the connector and allow the cruciform and the trigger bar to pop back up. If the connector was worn such to a point that wouldn't allow that to happen. Those are some of the things we can look at there. Continuing on, still no live ammunition, and there are firearms still visually and physically checked, and no magazine feed source. We have snap caps to demonstrate the feeding source. We would just use some snap caps or dummy rounds, put them in the magazine. Obviously, if they didn't retain in the magazine, you may have a feed lip issue. Insert them, and first I would do a slow, although you should do also a high speed one. I'd do a slow and just watch the snap cap feed in and chamber and release, and then you could do a faster one. And that confirms that operates. So that's one way you'd be taking a look at your feed ramp, and also you do a visual on your feed ramp, make sure it looks clean as well. The next thing we're looking at is chambering, which we talked about the same thing. But we did it high speed, and we can do it slow speed and watch it chamber in there the way it should, and it does. If it does it at that slow, it would certainly, you would expect it to do it quickly as well. And the cocking phase, well, same thing. When the magazine or when the slide comes back, the slide assembly is cocking that striker or partially cocking it, and when it comes back forward and you pull the trigger, it completes the cocking phase and goes into the firing phase. So that'll be our next point. We're checking that. That's what we're looking at there, to check to make sure it works properly. And that's that cruciform trigger working the trigger bar with the cruciform and the back side of the striker. Right there is what we're envisioning there. The safety is easy enough to check, make sure it's working. We can pull on the top of the trigger without engaging the trigger safety. And if the trigger safety were to fail, even if you pulled the trigger safety, I would expect the trigger not to engage as well. So that might be one issue you could check. The other one, as we've discussed already, is this nub on the trigger bar. As the slide articulates, it pushes that plunger safety for the striker up. And the connector, to make sure it's being engaged properly in the slide, we're going to simulate firing the firearm. We're going to simulate, and then we're going to, and that's the connector having reset the cruciform so it can pop back up and engage the striker. That's the demonstration. And last but not least is, I'm going to say, or speak to my level of readiness in performing troubleshooting work like this in the future. I would say that I'm moderately prepared. I feel prepared, but at the same time, you don't know what you don't know. And I don't have the expertise to know what I don't know at this time. But I have the confidence in believing that as the situations present themselves, that I can work through them. Okay, for part 3 of this video, we're going to be talking about headspace on this PSA Dagger kit. First of all, there's no live ammunition in the workspace. We do have some expended cartridge cases here, and there is no functional firearm. So we're going to take our go gauge, and we're going to insert it underneath the extractor. Kind of hard to do. Work around the camera. And once we get under the extractor, we're going to line it up with the chamber. And sure enough, it drops in, locks up, so it passes the go gauge test. Now we're going to do the same thing with the no go gauge. We're going to put it under the extractor, try to hold it in place, lined up with the chamber, and attempt to get it to lock up. And it does not lock. So it passes the no-go gauge. As you can see, the difference is it doesn't go as far back. So now we'll talk about dimensions. On this 9mm, for example, we're going to use a 45 ACP cartridge case just because it's bigger, but it works the same way. It goes from the case head to the rim of the case. That's where the headspace is measured. And on another design, such as the tapered cartridge case, such as this 357 SIG, it goes from the case head to a point on the shoulder, somewhere in this area here. And so that's the difference between a straight-walled centerfire handgun cartridge and a tapered one such as this 357 SIG.